Today we're going to talk about the treatment of eating disorders. So a little bit, as we've been talking about eating disorders, we've been focusing on a number of different kinds of issues. We've talked about those biological vulnerability, genetics, neurobiology, mood, stress, impulses. We've talked about those psychological factors, self-esteem, body dissatisfaction, and body image, perfectionism. We've also considered sociocultural factors. And each of these can lead to some restriction of eating. When there's excessive weight loss, we see anorexia. With bulimia, there's a restriction of eating, but remember that cycle, that restriction of eating then eventually leads to the kind of hunger that causes them to binge and maintain a normal weight. So with anorexia, there are a number of goals and strategies that we're focusing on. Initially, weight restoration. That's relatively easy, However, it's not the only thing that needs to be focused on. And if that's, what we focus on, we sort of miss the big picture. There's a lot of psychoed about, the meaning of eating, the meaning of, what happens when there's a binge or when there's a purge, what happens when there's a binge, why one eats, the real relationship between body image and reality, and a variety of behavioral and cognitive interventions that target a whole variety of kinds of issues, including food, weight, body image, etc. So you're not going to be surprised by this, that we're discussing the role of thoughts in our feelings and thoughts in our behaviors and with our symptoms. And so we're going to then be focusing not just on, that second column, what was eaten, but also on the context for it. What are people thinking? What happened here? And that last column is really a very important one. This last one, you may want to go back to chapter 2 and look at family issues. But often with family or with eating disorders, there are a number of different kinds of family issues that are raised in terms of communication, in terms of self-acceptance, in terms of acceptance of others, and in terms of gender issues, gender roles, and those things are often an important part of treatment. So let's think about recovery rates. If we were, if everything was as we'd like, those green columns, the green part of the bars, would be, would fill the entire bar. And that's not what we see in terms of treatment. That certainly treatment does make a difference. And this is with anorexia. It does make a difference. In some ways, it looks like focal psychodynamic therapy might be a little bit better than enhanced cognitive behavior therapy. It's not where we'd like. There still needs to be a lot done in terms of, improving outcomes for treatment of anorexia. Notice that both of those first two sets of bars are better than optimized treatment as usual. So in this third group, and this is longitudinal research, 12 months of treatment, 12 months follow-up, that what we see in that third bar is that people who are proficient at working with eating disorders do not necessarily have positive outcomes. And so really it looks like we need to be focusing on either of the first two groups and first two kinds of treatments. In terms of treating bulimia, antidepressants certainly seem to be one part. They do help to reduce the binging and purging, although not necessarily efficacious in the long term. Remember, part of what we want is to prevent relapse, and antidepressants do seem to help initially, but not over time. Psychosocial treatments, both in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, much as what we talked about with anorexia, that certainly seems to be very effective. Interpersonal psychotherapy, looking more at relationships than necessarily thoughts, seems actually to be as effective as CBT. So here's another way of looking at outcomes, and in this case we're looking at both anorexia and bulimia. Comparing two different studies, they're defining things a little bit differently, but it at least gives you a hint about what's going on. It certainly looks like more people with a diagnosis of bulimia tend to recover, 45% as opposed to 27.5% in the good group for anorexia. Fewer deaths, that's also a good thing. There seems to be a number of different predictors of when treatment seems to be best. Certainly one piece of that seems to be when there is comorbid depression, comorbid substance abuse, both seem to play a role. So one of the things that many people do when they're trying to lose weight is they skip a meal. And so one of the things that we might talk about in terms of treating an eating or someone with an eating disorder is not to skip meals, and in fact may suggest 3 meals plus snacks. And what you might do is watch your own eating and appetite when you skip a meal or eat one especially late. And if you're at all like me, when I do that, I'm much more likely to eat, snacky kinds of food and to do so more rapidly. Probably not exactly meeting my goals. And take care.